moment, Charles Barkley dropped a bomb inside ESPN. What if the biggest controversy at ESPN this year wasn't about a player, a trade, or even a championship? What if it was about two of the most powerful voices in sports media turning their attention toward each other? Because that's exactly what happened when Charles Barkley looked directly at the growing media storm surrounding LeBron James in Memphis and then delivered 3 words that instantly sent shockwaves across the basketball world. Do better. At first glance, it sounded harmless, but when those words were aimed at Stephen A. Smith, the face of First Take and arguably the most influential personality at ESPN, they carried a completely different weight. Suddenly, fans weren't talking about LeBron anymore. They weren't talking about Memphis anymore. They were talking about a potential collision between two media giants who now work under the same corporate roof. And the rumors exploded. Some fans claimed Barkley had finally gone too far. Others believed Stephen A. was furious behind the scenes. Then came even bigger speculation that powerful people inside ESPN were growing tired of Barkley's constant criticism and that this latest shot could create consequences nobody saw coming. Was this just another sports debate? Or was something much bigger happening behind closed doors? The timing couldn't have been more fascinating. For years, Barkley ruled television as one of the faces of Inside the NBA on TNT alongside Shaquille O'Neal, Kenny Smith, and Ernie Johnson. Meanwhile, Stephen A. Smith built First Take into a media empire, becoming one of the highest paid personalities in sports broadcasting. For most of their careers, they occupied different worlds. Now they were suddenly sharing the same network, the same executives, the same corporate structure, the same spotlight, and that's what made Barkley's comments feel different. Because when one superstar commentator publicly challenges another superstar commentator at the same company, people start asking questions. A lot of questions. What made things even more interesting was that Barkley wasn't attacking some random analyst. He was talking about a man he'd known for decades, a man he had laughed with, argued with, defended, and battled publicly before, which raises the biggest question of all. If Charles Barkley was willing to challenge Stephen A. Smith despite their friendship, what exactly bothered him so much? The answer starts with a single LeBron James comment, a comment that somehow grew into a national debate. A comment that dragged race, economics, media responsibility, and ESPN's biggest personalities into the same storm. And once that storm started growing, neither Barkley nor Stephen A. was willing to stay silent. What happened next revealed far more than a disagreement about Memphis. It revealed two completely different philosophies about sports media, controversy, and what responsibility comes with having a microphone that reaches millions of people every day. And trust me, the deeper we go into this story, the more surprising it becomes. Before we continue, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments below. And if you think Charles Barkley was right to call out the media, comment 1. If you think Stephen A. Smith had every right to defend Memphis, comment 2. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because the next chapter reveals why this clash became personal long before Memphis was ever mentioned. Two kings under one roof. For years, Charles Barkley and Stephen A. Smith were powerful in completely different worlds. Barkley had Inside the NBA. Stephen A. had First Take. One show felt like a late-night basketball barbershop full of jokes, honesty, chaos, and chemistry. The other felt like a daily courtroom where every hot take was put on trial before millions of fans. But then the NBA media world changed. Inside the NBA, the show fans thought would never move, suddenly became connected to ESPN and ABC. That meant Barkley, Shaq, Kenny, and Ernie were no longer just TNT legends looking across the street at ESPN. They were now inside the same empire, and that changed everything. Because Barkley has never been the kind of man who walks into a new building and lowers his voice. He does not soften his opinion because the logo changed. He does not check the room before speaking. If anything, being inside ESPN made his words even more dangerous. Stephen A. Smith was already the face of the network. He had the influence, the platform, the contract, and the daily spotlight. When he spoke, ESPN listened. When he reacted, the internet reacted. When he raised his voice, the sports world usually followed. So when Barkley publicly told Stephen A. and others to do better, it was not just another debate. It sounded like a challenge. One man had just walked into ESPN's house and questioned the way ESPN's loudest voice handled one of the biggest names in basketball. And the wild part was, Barkley did not seem nervous at all. That is what made fans lean forward. Was this a friendly disagreement? Was this the beginning of an internal ESPN power struggle? Or was Barkley simply doing what Barkley has always done, saying the thing everybody else was too careful to say out loud? To understand why he would take that risk, you have to understand Charles Barkley's entire public life. Because before he became the funny, brutally honest voice on television, he was a man who built his reputation on never backing away from conflict. And that history explains why Stephen A. Smith was not dealing with a normal coworker. He was dealing with Charles Barkley, the man who never learned to whisper. Charles Barkley was never designed to be quiet. Long before television made him beloved, basketball made him dangerous. He played with force. He talked with force. He lived with force. And if someone challenged him, Barkley rarely stepped back and asked for peace. He stepped forward and asked what the problem was. That attitude made him a superstar. It also made him a lightning rod. During his playing years, Barkley was not just known for rebounds, power, and impossible confidence. He was known for moments that made the league hold its breath. Arguments, confrontations, public incidents, headlines that followed him from arenas to courtrooms to late-night television. He was the kind of athlete who could make fans laugh one minute and make executives panic the next. But Barkley never tried to sell himself as perfect. That was his strange power. Other stars protected their image. Barkley attacked his own image before anyone else could. He told the world he was not a role model. He said parents should raise their kids, not basketball players on television. America argued about it for years. Barkley did not take it back. That is why his voice became so valuable later. Fans might disagree with him, but they believed he was saying what he actually thought. There was no filter, no corporate polish, no careful media mask. And that is exactly why ESPN could never fully control him. Barkley had already survived public backlash before. He had already been criticized, fined, mocked, questioned, and forgiven. By the time he became a television star, he understood something most media personalities fear. Controversy does not always end your career. Sometimes, if the audience believes you are real, controversy makes them listen hard. So when Barkley saw the LeBron-Memphis conversation turning into weeks of debate, he did not approach it like a careful employee. He approached it like Charles Barkley. He looked at a room full of powerful commentators and basically said, "You are better than this." But behind that bluntness was a deeper story. Because Barkley was not always just fearless. At one point, his anger nearly swallowed him whole. And one painful mistake changed the way he saw himself forever. The mistake that changed Barkley. Every loud man has a quiet moment that changes him. For Charles Barkley, that moment came when his anger finally hit someone who did not deserve it. Early in his NBA career, Barkley was carrying more than basketball pressure. He was carrying resentment, childhood frustration, personal pain, a feeling that he had to fight the world before the world fought him. That anger made him intense. It also made him reckless. Then came the incident that forced him to look in the mirror. During a heated moment with fans, Barkley reacted emotionally, and an innocent young girl was caught in the middle of the situation. For once, the backlash did not feel like noise. It felt personal. Barkley could not laugh it off. He could not power through it. He could not turn it into a joke or a defiant quote. He had to sit with the fact that his anger had reached the wrong person, and that is where the story of Charles Barkley becomes more complicated. Because he did not become soft after that. He became more aware. He started to understand that honesty and anger are not the same thing. Speaking your mind is one thing. Letting pain control your reaction is another. That lesson followed him into television. It is why Barkley can be harsh without always being hateful. He may call out a player. He may roast a network. He may challenge Stephen A. Smith on the biggest stage. But underneath the noise, there is often a moral line he thinks he is defending. In the Memphis situation, Barkley believed that line had been crossed by the media. He did not think LeBron's comment needed to become a national firestorm. He did not think every debate needed to become bigger, heavier, and more explosive just because it would create better television. To Barkley, the media was turning a simple opinion into a dramatic spectacle. But Stephen A. Smith saw something completely different, and that difference matters. Because Stephen A. was not just reacting as a television personality, he was reacting as someone who built his career by treating sports as more than sport. The empire of Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith did not become powerful by accident. He built his name one argument at a time. Before the television lights, before the viral clips, before the massive contract, Stephen A. was a reporter. He studied the NBA from the ground level. Locker rooms, press conferences, player relationships, front office whispers. He learned how the league really worked before he ever became one of its loudest voices. That background gave him credibility, but First Take gave him power. On that show, Stephen A. became more than an analyst. He became an event. Fans tuned in not just to hear the news, but to hear how Stephen A. would frame the news. Would he explode? Would he defend someone? Would he call out a superstar by name? That became the machine, and Stephen A. mastered it. He understood that modern sports media is not just about what happened, it is about why it matters, who it affects, and what bigger conversation is hiding underneath. So when LeBron James talked about Memphis, Stephen A. did not treat it like a throwaway joke on a golf course. He treated it like a superstar speaking casually about a city with real people, real economic struggles, and real pride. To Stephen A., Words from LeBron James carry weight. LeBron is not just another player. He is a global figure, a businessman, a community voice, a man whose opinions can shift attention, headlines, and perception. That is why Stephen A. pushed back. He was not saying LeBron hated Memphis. He was not trying to turn LeBron into a villain. He was saying that when someone that powerful speaks about moving a franchise away from a city, the conversation cannot stop at, he just does not like it there. For Stephen A., it was about responsibility. For Barkley, it was about overreaction. And when two men with that much pride believe they are protecting the truth, the argument becomes impossible to ignore. The spark was small, but once LeBron's words hit the media machine, the fire spread fast. LeBron's comment that lit the fuse. LeBron James probably did not think he was starting a national debate. He was relaxed, away from the pressure of the arena, talking casually in a golf setting. The conversation was loose, light, and not built like a serious press conference. Then the question came, which NBA cities did he not enjoy? LeBron answered Memphis and Milwaukee. That alone would have created some noise. Fans from those cities would have reacted, local radio would have complained, social media would have clipped it. Then, after a day or two, the story probably would have disappeared. But LeBron went further. He suggested that the Memphis Grizzlies might be better off moving to Nashville. That changed the entire temperature. Now, this was not just about whether a player liked a road trip. This was about the future of a franchise, the pride of a city, and the economic meaning of an NBA team in a community that does not always get national respect. Memphis fans heard it differently. They did not just hear a superstar saying he disliked their city. They heard one of the most powerful athletes alive suggesting their team might belong somewhere else. That is why Stephen A. Smith jumped in with force. He talked about Memphis as a majority black city. He talked about poverty. He talked about the local economy. He talked about what happens when teams leave cities behind. He used Oakland as an example of what can happen when franchises disappear and communities are left with the emotional and financial damage. To Stephen A., this was not fake outrage. It was a warning, but Barkley looked at the same conversation and saw something else. He saw media people stretching a simple comment until it became a full-blown controversy. He saw talented personalities using one LeBron quote to create days of heated debate. He saw the old machine doing what it always does, taking a small flame and pouring gasoline on it. And Barkley hates that machine. Not because he hates debate. He loves debate, but he hates fake seriousness. He hates when sports media acts like every comment is a national crisis. So when he finally spoke, he did not whisper. He called out the room, and Stephen A. was standing right in the middle of it. Why Stephen A. refused to back down? Stephen A. Smith heard Barkley's criticism, and he did not run from it. That is not who Stephen A. is. If Barkley built his image on raw honesty, Stephen A. built his image on fearless response. He does not let a challenge sit unanswered, especially when the challenge questions his judgment, his seriousness, or his motives. So when Barkley told him and others to do better, Stephen A. turned the phrase right back around. Respectfully, Charles Barkley had to do better too. That was the heart of his response. Stephen A. believed Barkley had reduced the entire conversation to something too simple. In Barkley's eyes, LeBron just did not like Memphis. In Stephen A.'s eyes, LeBron's words had consequences because they touched a city that already fights for respect. And Stephen A. made one thing clear. He was not apologizing for caring about Memphis. He was not apologizing for talking about race, economics, or community impact. He was not apologizing for treating LeBron's words as important. That is where the disagreement became bigger than both men. Because the real question was not whether LeBron was allowed to dislike Memphis. Of course he was. The real question was whether sports media has a responsibility to explore the meaning behind powerful words, or whether that responsibility sometimes turns into manufactured drama. Stephen A. believed he was giving voice to people who might feel dismissed. Barkley believed the media was turning a casual comment into a dramatic storm for attention. Both men had a point. And that is why the argument worked so well on television. It was not fake. It was not empty. It was two media giants looking at the same clip and seeing two completely different versions of the truth. But here is the part the internet ignored. Stephen A. never treated Barkley like an enemy. Even while firing back, he made it clear that he loved Barkley. He respected him. He considered him a friend. He invited him to debate the issue directly, not because he wanted destruction, but because that is how these two men communicate. They argue loudly, then they move forward. The internet wanted war, but the relationship was more complicated than that. Barkley versus the outrage machine. Charles Barkley's real enemy was never Stephen A. Smith. It was the outrage machine. That is the machine that takes one sentence and turns it into a week of yelling. The machine that rewards the loudest reaction, the sharpest headline, the most emotional clip. The machine that makes every sports story feel like a cultural emergency. Barkley has lived inside that machine for decades. moment. He understands it better than almost anyone. He knows how one comment can be sliced, reposted, exaggerated, and turned into something the original speaker never fully intended. He also knows that television rewards conflict. The hotter the debate, the longer the segment. The longer the segment, the more clips. The more clips, the more attention. And Barkley has always been suspicious of that. Yes, he creates controversy himself, but in his mind, there is a difference between honest controversy and manufactured outrage. That is why he pushed back so hard. He was not saying Memphis did not matter. He was not saying Stephen A had no right to defend the city. He was saying the conversation had grown too big, too fast, and too dramatic for what actually happened. But once Barkley spoke, the same machine he criticized grabbed his words and used them too. Suddenly, headlines made it look like Barkley had destroyed Stephen A. Suddenly, other shows took Barkley's criticism and sharpened it into personal attacks. Suddenly, a disagreement between old friends was being sold as a war inside ESPN. That is how quickly the story changed. Barkley said, "Do better." The internet heard, "Fight." Stephen A said, "I love him, but he is wrong." The internet heard, "ESPN Civil War." And that is the lesson hiding inside this entire drama. Modern sports media does not just cover conflict. It multiplies conflict. It adds pressure, volume, and suspicion until even friendship starts to look like betrayal. That is why rumors started flying about Stephen A trying to get Barkley banned, punished, or pushed out. But when you look closer, that version of the story begins to fall apart because the person most openly joking about Barkley leaving ESPN was not Stephen A. Smith. It was Barkley himself. The truth behind the ESPN rumor. The rumor sounded explosive. Stephen A. Smith was angry. Charles Barkley had crossed the line. ESPN executives were uncomfortable. Barkley could be banned, punished, or pushed away from the network. It was the kind of story the internet loves because it feels bigger than basketball. It has power, money, ego, and two famous names trapped under one corporate roof. But the problem is simple. There was no real proof that Stephen A. Smith was trying to remove Charles Barkley from ESPN. No confirmed internal campaign, no public demand, no serious evidence that Stephen A. controlled Barkley's role, schedule, show, or future. And that matters because First Take and Inside the NBA may now exist under the same broad ESPN universe, but they are not the same room. Stephen A. does not run Barkley's chair. Barkley does not answer to Stephen A. Their shows have different formats, different crews, and different identities. The disagreement was real. The conspiracy was much weaker. In fact, the most ironic part of the whole story is that Barkley has repeatedly joked about wanting ESPN to fire him. He has talked openly about having years left on his contract. He has joked that being fired while still getting paid would not exactly ruin his life. That is pure Barkley. Most employees avoid making jokes about being fired. Barkley turns it into a punchline on camera. And ESPN, despite all the noise, keeps putting him on television. Why? Because Barkley is rare. He is unpredictable, but he is valuable. He creates moments. He creates clips. He creates conversation. Fans trust that when Barkley speaks, they are not hearing a perfect corporate sentence. They are hearing Barkley. That is why the ending of this controversy is not as simple as Stephen A. versus Charles. It is really about how ESPN handles two completely different types of power. Stephen A. is the polished empire builder. Barkley is the wild truth teller. One dominates through structure. The other dominates through freedom. And when those two forces collide, the audience cannot look away. But the final lesson is bigger than both of them because this story reveals exactly where sports media is heading next. The real lesson behind the Barkley and Stephen A. clap. In the end, this was never just about Memphis. It was never just about LeBron James. And it was never really about whether Charles Barkley and Stephen A. Smith hated each other. They do not. This was a clash between two visions of modern sports media. Stephen A. Smith represents the idea that sports are connected to everything: race, money, cities, power, pride, business, and community. To him, when LeBron James speaks about a franchise leaving Memphis, the conversation deserves seriousness because NBA teams are not just entertainment. They are part of a city's identity. Charles Barkley represents another truth. Not every comment needs to become a national emergency. Not every debate needs to be stretched until it turns into outrage. Not every opinion from a player has to become a week-long media trial. That is why both men were compelling. Stephen A. defended responsibility. Barkley defended perspective. And somewhere between those two ideas is where the truth probably lived. LeBron had every right to say he did not enjoy a city. But when you are LeBron James, your words travel farther than normal words. They land differently, they carry business weight, cultural weight, and emotional weight. Stephen A was right to remember the people of Memphis. Barkley was right to question whether media sometimes makes drama bigger than it needs to be. The lesson for athletes is simple. Speak freely, but understand the size of your microphone. The lesson for media is just as important. Analyze deeply, but do not turn every sentence into a battlefield. And the lesson for fans may be the most human one of all. People can disagree without becoming enemies. Barkley and Stephen A showed that. They fired back, they challenged each other, they made noise, but underneath the tension, there was still respect. That matters in a world where every disagreement is treated like a war. Sports should create debate, but it should not destroy basic respect. Basketball is better when strong voices can challenge each other, learn from each other, and still leave room for peace when the cameras turn off. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Charles Barkley was right? Comment 1. Do you think Stephen A. Smith made the stronger point? Comment 2. If you believe both men had a fair argument, comment 3. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with another NBA fan, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story behind the biggest names in basketball.